Okay, and we've got one more presenter, Dr. Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. She'll be presenting on her Delta Rice update. She is a Cooperative Extension Delta Farm Advisor based in San Joaquin County, and her research and extension program focuses on field crops and soil and water resource management. All right, Michelle, whenever you're ready.
Okay, am I sharing? How do I look? So I'm the farm advisor. Thanks, Whitney. Michelle Leinfelder-Miles. I haven't presented at one of the rice grower meetings up in the Sacramento Valley during the wintertime, so I'm glad to have this opportunity to present now. And I'm going to be talking about some of the activities that I have going on in the Delta region. So first, a little bit of overview on Delta rice. Acreage is a fraction of what acreage is in the Sacramento Valley. This table is showing San Joaquin County rice production. Most, if not all, of the rice production in San Joaquin County is now in the Delta region. There used to be an area in the southeast corner of the county where there was some rice production previously, but that almost has disappeared and turned into tree crops. So now most of this acreage, I would say, is in the Delta region. There's also some acreage in that tail of Sacramento County that's in the Delta. Acreage is increasing little by little. Rice production is being supported by the Delta Conservancy for reasons of mitigating soil subsidence and carbon emissions. Some of the main differences in the management of rice in the Delta region compared to the Sacramento Valley includes drill seeding. So all of the Delta rice is drill seeded, and the permanent flood is established at about 3 to 4 leaves. Rice in past years has been grown as part of a rotation on some of the farms in the Delta, maybe 2 years of rice, followed by 2 years of tomatoes, and then back to rice again. As I've spoken with growers this year, rice production tends to go back to back. A lot of growers have gotten out of the tomato business, and so these rice growers are now growing their rice back to back, and rotation is not as common. Challenges in the Delta include cool summer nights that can cause blanking. It also limits our variety options. Windy conditions can compromise our timing of pesticide applications, and then pest problems. We probably have fewer pests than what growers in the Sacramento Valley struggle with, but certainly we have our share of pests that can be challenging. These are the activities that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to start talking about a herbicide trial, and then I'll briefly touch on the armyworm monitoring that I'm doing and some weedy rice outreach that I'm doing here in the Delta. So obviously weeds are important pests in California rice systems, and herbicide resistance can occur, as Whitney and Kasim have spoken about already. And then Kasim talked a lot about this chemistry called Loyant, this new product that's registered in the southern United States, but it would be a new chemistry in California. So experience in the southern US has shown efficacy on some of the broadleaf weeds and the sedges and rushes, and some activity on the grass species, barnyard grass and watergrass. The question for this trial specifically was, what is the efficacy of Loyant in the drill seeded systems that we have in the Delta region? We had a few different treatments that we looked at. We looked at different rates in this trial in 2019. We compared Loyant to the grower standard practice, which is the Regiment, Sandia, Prowl, and Super Wham treatment, that fourth line. We didn't have an untreated control. Instead, we called Prowl, our pre-emergence treatment, our control treatment, and compared to that. And then we had one treatment there listed at the bottom where we substituted the Loyant into what would have been the grower standard treatment, except we used Loyant instead of propanil. In this trial, these were the weeds that we had particular problems with, the grasses, Sprangletop was a particular problem in 2019, and then there are a few sedges in this field, although certainly the grasses are the most problematic weeds that we were looking at in this trial. Crop injury, we looked at crop injury starting at 7 days after treatment, and then in subsequent weeks after that, 7-day intervals. The Loyant treatment did very well, no crop chlorosis or necrosis. However, we did notice some leaf curling at about 14 days after treatment. That symptom, however, was gone by 21 days. So by the 3rd week, we weren't noticing that leaf curling at all. The grower standard treatment, we did notice some pretty noticeable effect of crop chlorosis and some tip burning. And that effect was a little bit less when we substituted the Loyant for the propanil. We didn't, however, see any severe crop injury in this trial. There was no stunting or stand reduction, and no differences among these treatments in heading. This table is probably a little bit busy, but the point to be made here is that we looked at weeds, we counted weeds in each plot over 7-day intervals. And really the only significant differences statistically were that all the treatments did better than the prowl, what we called our control treatment. And then there are a couple columns there where I excluded Sprangletop. So Loyant, as Kasim has already talked about, does not have activity on Sprangletop, and Sprangletop was a particular problem in this field. So I excluded Sprangletop from the counts just to kind of get an idea for how the other weeds were being affected and how the treatments were doing when you excluded a weed that we knew the herbicide wouldn't have any activity on. Our yields, there were no differences in our seed moisture and our yields at the end of the season. And our yields were basically quite good. The Loyant treatments had yields that trended better than the grower standard herbicide practice. And all of them were better than county averages. So to conclude our results from the 2019 trial, we did observe a little bit of leaf rolling from the Loyant treatments, but those symptoms were gone about a week later by the 3rd week after treatment. Loyant had good activity on the grasses, and the activity the control was similar to the grower standard practice, but keeping in mind that tank mixes would be necessary in order to manage the Sprangletop. So we could see Loyant as fitting into a herbicide program for growers here in the Delta where we have our drill seeded systems. I'm just going to touch very briefly on the trial that we're conducting this year in 2020. We're looking at Loyant in combination with other herbicides this year, trying to get a handle or a feel for how these combinations would help control the weeds that we're seeing in the trial. Interestingly enough, we're not seeing Sprangletop the way that we saw it last year. And then another thing that we did observe is that the Loyant had some of this leaf rolling that we observed in 2019, but it was a little bit more severe in 2020. We don't have a really good handle on why that is, but likely some environmental factors that caused that leaf rolling to be prolonged. But after a few weeks, it was probably a few weeks that we saw that leaf rolling compared to just 1 week in 2019. But after a few weeks, the rice has come out of it and there seems to be no differences in heading among those treatments. And then finally, the last thing that I'll say, and this would be a little bit in contradiction to what Kasim has mentioned earlier on, but at least in this drill seeded trial, I've observed that Loyant and Super Wham, which is that treatment that's at the bottom of the table, is actually doing quite well and controlling the grasses better than some of the other treatments that are listed higher up in that table. So we'll see how this all pans out at the end of the season when we get our final results. So armyworm monitoring, we've been monitoring in the Delta in about 3 different fields since 2016. And then I collaborate, Luis takes the lead on this. I send our results up to Luis, and he reports out the Delta data with his weekly updates. So if there's anyone out there who is growing or consulting in the Delta region, I recommend that you get subscribed to Luis's updates. And then we've partnered or collaborated with the California Rice Commission to ensure that the Section 18 on Intrepid has also been approved for San Joaquin County and Delta rice. This is a graph that shows the true armyworm counts that we've seen over the last few years. Our highest peaks have been in June and early July, just as Luis has indicated in his results. And this year we didn't see numbers quite as high as what we've seen in previous years. I will say, however, that, so before I move on, I would say 2 out of the 3 sites where I'm doing the monitoring treated for armyworm this year. In the one site where the grower didn't treat for armyworm, we do see a little bit of panicle injury. That picture at the bottom left enhances the what the damage looks like when the armyworms are causing injury to the panicle. But you know, just walking the fields, I have noticed a little bit of panicle injury where the grower wasn't treating, but otherwise damage seems to be very slight this year, if any. And then this is a picture actually of a cover crop trial that I have immediately adjacent to some rice. I hope my mouse is showing here, but this is the rice in the background, and this was a cover crop trial that we had. It's a mix of cowpea and triticale, and we were in there a few weeks ago to do sampling of the cover crop, and before we even walked into the plots, we were noticing a lot of injury to the triticale, the grasses here. The cowpea seems to be just fine. The triticale was severely impacted by feeding, and you get down low, you cut that biomass away, and you can see the armyworm pressure that was in this field adjacent. And I bring this up only because in the Delta region, but probably in the Sacramento Valley too, there's a lot of riparian areas, there's some wildlife habitat, and there could be you know, areas very close to our rice systems that will harbor the pests that can do some damage to our rice. Now here we didn't see damage in those particular rice fields, and you know, it could be that triticale is a preferred host for the armyworms, I don't know. But certainly we saw a lot of damage in this field right next door. So finally, weedy rice. Whitney's been a huge help in helping doing some outreach on weedy rice here in the Delta region. So just to kind of get down to the basics, so weedy rice is weedy because it has undesirable characteristics. And one of those characteristics is that it shatters very easily. Sometimes it can be called red rice because it may have a red pericarp, but certainly it's that shattering and the seed dormancy that make it really undesirable and weedy. So we've observed weedy rice in the Delta since 2016, and my primary activities include assessing the distribution of weedy rice and disseminating information on what we know to be the best management practices. Whitney's talked about different biotypes, how they have different characteristics. What we have found in the Delta is type 1 weedy rice, and characteristics of that biotype are tall stature. It grows taller than the cultivated rice, and sometimes it's a little bit yellower too. So even if you're not observing that it's taller quite yet, you may notice that the color is a little bit lighter. It is highly shattering and has very high dormancy. So if those seeds fall off the panicle, they will get into the soil and contribute to a weed seed bank. And those weeds can last for a very long time. We're aware of a few ranches in the Delta where there is weedy rice with infestations that range from low to quite severe. Our best management practices. And you know, we're learning as we go, as this is a relatively new pest, well, not new, but a re-emerged pest, let's say, in rice systems. So use only certified seed. In fact, this is the law now. Since type 1 shatters very easily, rogue those plants as early as you see them, if possible. And after heading, try to bag the panicles and remove the panicles, if the infestation is not severe. Make sure your equipment is clean and harvest weedy rice infested fields last if possible. Crop rotation or fallowing may be needed if infestations are severe. And since type 1 has high dormancy, avoid tillage or use only light or shallow tillage whenever possible. In the Delta, we have observed in one of the first fields where we observed weedy rice, we did find that the weed seed bank was reduced when the grower had post-management that included mowing, but no tillage in the fall, followed by winter flooding. And that winter flooding seems to help with seed deterioration and reducing the infestation in the following year. So with that, I thank you, and I see there's a poll. So go ahead and take your poll.